What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Arnies. We are three wanderers of the Wasteland. I'm Matt Johnson, and I hope my life will be separated into dramatic chapter breaks eventually.
I'm Keith Baker, and I just sprayed some fresh chrome in my teeth, ready to go to Valhalla.
And I'm Austin Terry, and who knew nipple clamps would become the high fashion of the Wasteland?
Yeah, I don't think I would have predicted that one. On today's show, of course, we're returning to the Wasteland for the first time in 10 years with Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. Mad Max Fury Road hit theaters in 2014, and this prequel has taken quite a while to reach the screen. Not surprising when you kind of consider the history of the franchise. Legendary director George Miller has been directing these films for 45 years, starting with the original Mad Max in 1979. The third film came out in 1985, and we had to wait until 2014 just to get the production hell-spawn fourth film that was Fury Road. Once we did get it, it became a critical darling and major awards contender and winner, mainly centered around the technical and practical aspects. Miller always stated he wanted to do both another Mad Max film and a prequel focused on Charlize Theron's character Furiosa, and just a quick little 10-year fast forward, and we have the latter. Austin and Keith, how are you feeling about the idea of a Furiosa spinoff going in? You know, I'm sure after Mad Max Fury Road, which I know, Austin, you in particular love, I'm sure maybe you were like, oh, I hope we get another Tom Hardy Mad Max movie. So how are you guys kind of feeling about getting a big spin-off like this many years later? And then I want to hear your non-spoiler thoughts, of course, on Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga.
Yeah, you guys know I'm a huge fan of Fury Road. And when Furiosa was announced, I was surprised that was the story they were going to tell next. But anything to get me back into that world, I was down for. So I've always been hyped for this movie. And I've always kind of kept the faith, too. I know when those original trailers dropped, people were worried about the effects and that it kind of looked wonky. And I always stayed excited for this, and going right into it, I had a blast with Furiosa. Anything, like I said, that gets me back into this world, I'm always going to be down for. I liked that this was different enough from Fury Road to separate itself as its own like original story, but then it also kind of acted as a nice compendium to Fury Road, so it fills out the world a lot more. Seeing Furiosa as someone who's born into this world, but then interacting with people who can remember a time before the Wasteland was really interesting to me. And then just like seeing everything from the Citadel to the Bullet Farm to Gasoline Town, like getting to go explore those places more than we did in Fury Road was awesome. I thought the action like totally lived up to that Mad Max billing. And Chris Hemsworth as our villain was like so enthralling and great, and probably a better villain than anything we got in Fury Road. So Furiosa kind of hit on all cylinders for me. No pun intended there with the vehicles. And I just can't wait for more. I hope he gets to do another one with Tom Hardy. But this was a great addition to Fury Road in my mind.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. I think you're right, Austin. I think it definitely fits the bill. Yeah, I did think it was cool that we got to explore more of this world. I guess when I was watching the original Mad Max, or not the original, but Tom Hardy's Mad Max, it was just more focused on the action more than anything, which is great and carried over to this one just as well. But I never really found myself too interested in the lore behind everything. So this definitely was a good change up to get a little bit more of a background story behind it all. I thought Anya Taylor-Joy was good. I thought I don't know the girl's name, the little who played the younger version. I thought she was great as well. Yeah, Chris Hemsworth. I was really impressed with his character as his villain. I didn't even recognize him at first. I didn't even know who it was.
He's got that prosthetic nose on.
Yeah. And then George Miller, I'm just really impressed with how, yeah, he just made this feel like this Mad Max, like we said, came out in 2014. He made this feel like this was a year or two later type sequel or prequel. It doesn't feel like it's been 10 years. So I'm definitely interested in getting more. But yeah, overall had a great time.
Yeah, I was definitely one of the people when I saw the initial trailers for Furiosa. I was like, oh, okay, I like the content of it, but I don't like the effects of it. I think like the visuals and the backgrounds look a little bit odd, which, you know, isn't unusual for movies that come out today. I think it only stuck out to me more because you compare it directly to its, I guess, quote-unquote sequel now, Fury Road, which was, I think, the best thing that everybody said about it was kind of that practical nature. So it made me a little nervous. I was like, uh-oh, is this like, you know, to get this kind of rolled out finally, they didn't want to do the crazy, you know, a redo of like the insane production stories that you hear about Fury Road. So they're like, okay, let's try and use more CG and effects. So I think I was nervous about that, but I was still excited to see it. And going into it, I was thoroughly impressed. Yeah, I think it's a wildly different movie from Fury Road with a lot of similarities, a lot of the same characters, but I feel like in a way this one's more of like, I don't know. It's more of like a dramatic revenge story than even is an action movie. I think Fury Road is without question just a balls to the wall action movie, and so much so that there's really not even that much more to say about it, and not in a bad way, but it's just the entire movie basically is just one long action sequence. That was kind of the whole like concept of it. And this one definitely has a lot of great action, but it's a little bit more few and far between, and we actually get to spend time with the characters that we met in the original movie. We get a lot more of the world building. We understand kind of the ins and outs and the politics of the Wasteland, which is weird to say because it really is such a, when we say politics, it really is like these three kind of communities at the heart of it. Like that's really all we're talking about, but it's still very interesting. So I think that's quite a departure from Fury Road. It's like we're actually spending time with characters and like talking about the world itself. And I think for some people, maybe that'll be too much of a change, but I still think all of that non-action stuff was interesting enough to kind of pull me through it. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it is too long, 2.5 hours. It's quite a bit longer than Fury Road and the other Mad Max movies. And because of that, I think there were like issues here and there with pacing, just kind of like some scenes like, okay, I don't know if we needed this. It's not bad. I like it, but it's still causing it to drag a little bit. That's probably all I can really say. And then, I mean, my only other negative is like I said at the outset, like I did have those issues with the trailers. It didn't dampen my enjoyment of the movie, but there are definitely scenes where, like you're seeing characters like interact in the foreground and then your eyes like wander to the background and you're like, oh, that is like very green screen, like almost like a distracting degree. So it's a lot more CG in that sense than Fury Road or the other movies. So that stuff sticks out a little bit, but again, not enough to ruin the experience at all. I thought it was a great time.
Yeah, I definitely noticed some of the CG too, especially in the intro. And so maybe I did get used to it, but like the opening, I was like, oh no, I hope this isn't too much CGI. But then whenever we actually get into the action, it still is, or at least looks all practical. So that didn't take me out of it. I was happy that the CG was really just for kind of the background stuff. And sometimes your eyes like have to adjust, but overall, it didn't take away from my experience, I would say. I also think the tone of this one is like dramatically darker than Fury Road, especially when like we kind of get to the end of our film. So that was interesting too, of like, this is really like the theme of this movie is hopelessness and how you're trying to fight against that in the Wasteland. And you have to delve into that a lot more, particularly with Furiosa and then also with Chris Hemsworth's character too. So I like that like they do a lot to separate itself from Fury Road in this one too.
Yeah, well, there you go. I think the three of us went in with varying degrees of excitement, all the way to like super excited down to like, okay, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic. But it sounds like we all three came out thoroughly enjoying it, having a great time with this one. So if you were kind of on the fence, maybe you were like, I want another Mad Max movie. I don't know about, a Furiosa spinoff. I think you're definitely going to have a great time with this one. So this gets an easy recommendation from us. So go check this one out in theaters. Go support this one. And yeah, once you do that, come on back and listen to the rest of our episode, because from here on out, we're doing all things spoilers. Lots of good stuff to talk about with this one. All right, everybody, welcome to spoiler territory for Furiosa. Guys, before we get into all of our thoughts that we wrote down here, let's do some cast, crew, and reception talk.
All right, so Furiosa is, of course, directed by George Miller, who is most well known for 3,000 Years of Longing. Actually, you probably know him from the Mad Max films, Babe, and, of course, Happy Feet. It's written by George Miller and Nico Latharis, and our score is composed by the one and only Tom Hulkenberg, and, of course, based on characters created by George Miller and Byron Kennedy.
All right, going into our cast, we have Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa, Ayla Brown as Young Furiosa, Chris Hemsworth as Dementus, Tom Burke as Praetorian Jack, Lackey Holm as Immortan Joe, Nathan Jones as Rictus, and Josh Hellman as Scrotus. What a name. All right, guys, there's our cast and crew. Any positives, any negatives? What do we have?
Yeah, I'll take the easy one. My highlight is for sure Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa. She did a great job kind of picking up where Charlize Theron left off, even to the point where, like, by the end of the film, she sounds like Charlize Theron. And I looked it up to see if they dubbed her with Charlize Theron's voice, but that's just her dialect and, like, doing a lot of practice to make her sound like that. So I thought she was great. She has very few lines of dialogue, I think even less than Tom Hardy. So she has to do a lot of acting just with like her eyes and her facial expressions. And I think she like channels her rage and her sorrow in some moments like perfectly without saying anything. So I was super impressed with Anya Taylor-Joy in this one.
Yeah, I'll shout out her as well. I thought she was great. And I even liked the young actress that played played her in the beginning. I felt like the young girl was in it for such a long time. I was like, when are we going to get Anya Taylor-Joy?
Yeah, Anya Taylor-Joy doesn't really come in until like an hour into the movie. And Isla Brown actually, I think, has to do a lot more speaking than Anya does. And she was great.
I'll shout out Chris Hemsworth. That's an easy one. I thought he was great. He was very fun. It was cool to see him play a villain and look different, look a little bit weathered and older. I thought his accent was hilarious in this. He had like that exaggerated Australian accent that I think played really well into this world. So yeah, I like the way I like visually how all these characters look, and I think what they decided to do with Hemsworth was a good choice.
Yeah, for sure. Couldn't agree more. Our two leads here with Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth do a great job solo. They do a great job together. I was like kind of wanting more scenes of them. It made sense for the story, or more scenes of them together. I mean, it made sense for the story, but yeah, they were just, great characters to see developed in the Wasteland. Definitely more so than the previous film. So that was really cool to see. For me, I have two quick ones. I think pretty easy. Well, maybe one would surprise. I don't know if it'll surprise you guys, but the easy one is George Miller. I think to still have this kind of style and this flair and this ability to make these kinds of movies is crazy. He's 80 years old. He also looks like he's like in his mid 50s. I don't know if you guys have like seen him in interviews. Like the fact that he's 80 is kind of strange. So maybe like the fact that he like is so young looking and spry kind of leads to him still having the ability to do these crazy balls to the wall movies. But yeah, and the fact that he's been doing this franchise specifically for 45 years, like at this point, I wouldn't want anybody else to really tackle it. So he just has such a singular vision for it. And it's cool, like we talked about, this movie, while sharing a lot of elements from Fury Road, it is quite a different movie in terms of tone. So it's fun to see him playing around with like different things in the Wasteland too. And then for my cast, like I said, I echo what you guys said. But somebody that I hadn't seen before was this Tom Burke guy who played Praetorian Jack. And he's kind of becomes Furiosa's, I guess, begrudging mentor at first, and then maybe, potential kind of lover by the end of the story. And I just thought he was cool. That's really all I can say. He was just super cool and engaging to watch in like the non-action scenes, but he definitely had kind of that Tom Hardy Mad Max feel in the action scenes themselves. So yeah, I thought he was just super fun to watch, and the pairing of him and Furiosa was a very good one too.
Also refreshing in this world to find someone who still is trying to be good, because everyone, including Max in Fury Road, is like not actively trying to be good, just trying to survive. Yeah. And this guy's like actively trying to help Furiosa get to where she's trying to go. So I like that. And when you mentioned George Miller being 80, it's also crazy because if you read behind the scenes stuff of Fury Road, there's a whole like novel written about it, which I would highly recommend anybody to go check out. But they talk about how George Miller like storyboards everything, and like everything you see is not multiple takes. He draws exactly what he wants to happen, and it's like executed to perfection on set. Same thing with this movie. But the wild thing about Furiosa is he wrote this whole movie for Charlize Theron in Fury Road so she could have the context of her character. So he had this movie written and planned out even before Fury Road started filming, which is just, the guy's creative mind is insane. Yeah. And I hope he sticks around forever, because he is a treasure in cinema.
Definitely. Absolutely. Yeah, so you guys know what the three of us thought, but what is everybody else saying? So Furiosa Mad Max Saga has received very positive reviews. So far it has an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes, with a consensus of retroactively enriching Fury Road with greater emotional heft, if not quite matching it in its propulsive throttle. Furiosa is another glorious swerve and mastermind George Miller's breathless race towards the cinematic Valhalla. The story, action sequences, and performances were praised, while some criticized the pacing of said story due to the 2.5-hour runtime and sometimes obvious CGI extension of the backgrounds, but those were pretty much the only negatives I could find. And then interesting to get into some box office talk. The film is projected to earn $40 to $45 million in its opening weekend based on a $168 million budget. So this is definitely off to a bit of I guess you could say like an underperforming start. It seems like this will be a hard road to earn any significant profit here. So, that's not like the most exciting news as of now, but I thought it was also kind of interesting to take a little look back. Fury Road actually cost more, and that one cost upwards of $185 million to make 10 years ago, and it only made $385 million. So at that point, we're talking about a pretty minuscule profit for such a blockbuster film. If you do the whole like normal rule of like doubling your production budget to see where that lines up with like the box office, that's like only like $15 million. So it's definitely, that wasn't a big success either. So it's not surprising maybe that the budget for this one was smaller. And not only that, but maybe Fury Road's kind of just fine box office performance was why it took a while for this one to get greenlit in the first place. Maybe, you know, producers were like, are we going to spend that much money just to make not very much again? And it's a spin-off movie. Is that going to do well? So kind of interesting to compare the box office of Furiosa with Fury Road.
Yeah, the box office is disappointing too because it's shaping up to be the worst Memorial Day opening weekend in decades. So that's not boding well for the start of this movie. I'm honestly surprised that it has underperformed so far, just with how well Fury Road is regarded and how much word of mouth that movie has and how like it's kind of universally loved. Like you almost think this is a built-in hit, but it does just kind of speak to the broader state of people going to the movies these days.
Yeah, I do wonder, and again, I'm not saying I would have preferred this. I'm just curious, like if we live in an alternate universe where like George Miller does eventually make Furiosa, but instead he decides to make, I mean, Austin, you talked about how he had Furiosa written before. I think he also had the 5th Mad Max film already written, because he keeps talking about it. He calls it Mad Max The Wasteland as the title for his 5th proposed Mad Max movie. So like if we just like, you know, in the alternate reality where instead of Furiosa, that comes later, like this weekend, Mad Max The Wasteland comes out, does that underperform because of like you said, kind of just the state of people going to movies these days? Like they'll just wait a few weeks and then they can get it on digital? Or would that have done better because so many people kind of like outside of the theaters of Fury Road eventually kind of were able to make their way and experience that film like on digital or streaming for the first time? Like, do they flock to this new one? Like, I don't even know if that would have made much of a difference. I'm curious.
Or if he gets this movie to come out in under 10 years, like if they greenlight it quicker and it comes out within 3 years of Fury Road, like maybe this performs better and then you get, like maybe this is the Wasteland after Furiosa has already come out in like 2017.
Sure. Yeah. Kind of interesting to think about. But yeah, there you go, guys. So time to get a little bit deeper. I think it's time. Let's get into our freeform discussion here, the main part of our show where we all just, you know, open up a big Google Doc and write down a bunch of points of things we want to spend a bit more time on and kind of just break it all down. So guys, let's do some general opening thoughts. Where do you want to start us off today?
So we've talked a lot about how this is a good extension to Fury Road. Do you think it lives up to that pedigree? Would you say like, yeah, it's absolutely lives up to everything that people talk about when they talk about the 90% practical of Fury Road and just the technical like achievements of that film?
Yeah, I would say it does. I think all the action is definitely there. I mean, you get to the end of both these movies and you're just exhausted from your eyes are just like going back and forth looking at everything happening. And like we said, we definitely get more of the world building in this one. So I would say it does. For me, it's like a package deal with both of these movies.
Yeah, I think it's a great opening question. I was thinking about it. I think, does it live up to Fury Road's pedigree? I think when we're talking about pedigree with Fury Road, we're talking about practical filmmaking and action sequences, like galore. That's the entire movie, pretty much. So does Furiosa live up to those two things? I would say on both fronts, no. I think the practical stuff, when it's there, is great. There's just less of it. And the same thing with the action. Like, you know, there's not as much of it, but when it's there, it's great. So like in those bursts in Furiosa, there's definitely moments where you're like, holy shit, this is that Fury Road pedigree on screen here. But as a full package does it, I think that's where it gets a bit interesting, because I would say it lives up to Fury Road's pedigree, but in its own right, I think Fury Road, that's like that action practical package. This one, like I said, it has those bursts, but like as like this like crazy post-apocalyptic dramatic revenge thriller, I think Furiosa is kind of setting up its own pedigree. So like they it's like kind of the compare and contrast bubbles, right? Like there's two different sides, but then it has like that middle where they overlap. So I think they have their own pedigrees, but then whenever Furiosa is kind of doing like those crazy, like long action sequences and they're showing off the practical nature of those, it makes you go, oh my God, this is like Fury Road all over again. This is crazy. I'm like exhilarated in the theater. But I think strangely, despite being a prequel, like Furiosa, like I said in the non-spoiler, it's kind of standing on its own because it's such a different movie in terms of story and tone.
Yeah, I think it does live up to the pedigree. And I also think Fury Road is going to benefit so much from Furiosa existing, because the whole time that you're watching Furiosa, you get this sense that it's building to something. Like you get you get the practical action, but it's really like a 15-minute extended War Week sequence, which we'll talk about and is great. And then you also get like little bits of action, and then it builds out this world. But what it's building to is Fury Road, and Fury Road is that extended balls to the wall action existing in this world. And because Furiosa is setting up all of the extended things and the politics that you talked about, Matt, like Fury Road can kind of now just exist even deeper into this world, because now that I've seen Furiosa, if I go watch Fury Road, I now understand all these characters even better. And then you kind of can only focus on the action in Fury Road. So I think Fury Road benefits significantly from Furiosa existing. And I also think if you give it 6 or 7 years, Furiosa is going to kind of build on its own, and it's going to be looked on very favorably than maybe it is today with the disappointing box office numbers.
Yeah, I agree. Like we get what's his face? We get Immortan Joe, who I guess we see him die in Mad Max. So yeah, it was cool to see what he's all about in this, because it's been a while since I've seen Fury Road, but I don't know if we really got a whole lot about who he is or what his motivations are or anything like that. So it's kind of cool to see, like you guys said earlier, the politics behind it all and what they're going after.
Yeah, I agree. I think in Fury Road, he's like a very cool design character. But I've never thought Immortan Joe was a compelling villain at all. I mean, his whole thing was just that he's trying to continue his line. He's trying to have a son, which they reference in like one scene specifically. But yeah, he's just trying to breed all these wives that he's locked away. And it's like really fucked up. It's like, oh, what a disgusting villain. But yeah, other than that, he's just chasing Furiosa across the wasteland. That's really it. Trying to get his wives back. In this movie, I thought it was interesting to see them like on purpose kind of not show us those scenes as much and instead focus on how Immortan Joe is just actually this crazy political rival in this world. Like, he's really smart. They built him out in a way more compelling way. And so I think that's just another example to Austin's point of like, I think this movie is gonna, it's weird to say, it's like, I think this is one of the best prequels I've seen, because I think this movie is made better by having seen Fury Road first, but then so it's like a sandwich. You watch Fury Road, then you watch Furiosa, and you're like, wow, I'm glad I watched Fury Road first. It makes this experience so much better. But then watching Furiosa makes you go, man, I gotta watch Fury Road again. That's gonna make that way better, kind of to have that world built out. And yeah, even like going to the story, it's kind of funny. Keith and I were talking about, you know, in a way, when it comes to Furiosa, her storyline in this movie is the exact same as it is in Fury Road. She has the exact same goal. I made my mom a promise. I'm going to go back to the green place. It's exactly what she's doing in this movie, too, except she doesn't succeed at that goal until Fury Road. But then you think about Fury Road, she finally makes it back home. She fulfilled her promise, and she gets there, and it's just gone. The wasteland has overtaken the green place, and then the wives, her and Mad Max, are like, all right, well, you know what? There is one green place we know. It's the Citadel. Let's go back. Let's take it over. She kills Immortan Joe, and then she becomes like the new leader of the Citadel. So like knowing that that's where she ends up in Fury Road also makes this movie, I think, a lot cooler to think about, like those implications of like what the green place actually is. Like, what does it mean to go home? Kind of that hopelessness of the wasteland we talked about earlier. So yeah, just really crazy, like prequel, sequel, intertwining elements here and like making each other better.
I also think like this is probably a good point to get into the Dementis of it all, because what a fun villain in this movie. Of like you said, that you see Immortan Joe, and he is kind of the political genius of this world. But then Dementis shows up, and the whole movie he's like kind of a bumbling idiot who's just failing upward the whole film and like weirdly succeeding. None of these three other warlords really know what to make of him, because he shows up and just like jacks up all their plans. And then also the way he like continues to fail, but is also like speaking out to all his followers about how he's failing. Like I think of the time when the War Rig comes to Gasoline Town and they're all rioting in the streets, and he's still talking into the microphone and saying like, they're going to kill me if you don't help me out. Just like really goofy stuff, but like just continues to be a thorn in the side of all these other political leaders.
Yeah, I would say that I don't know what they would say when they were writing it, but just watching it based on one viewing so far, I think the point of Dementis' character, you know, is to chronicle the rise and fall of a cult leader, which you see in real life all the time. And they were like, you know, it'd be kind of cool to do that in the Wasteland. Like Dementis as a leader only works in the beginning of the movie, whenever he and his followers aren't connected to that main kind of three-pronged part of the Wasteland with Gastown, Bullet Farm, and the Citadel. Whenever they're off by themselves, and he has like kind of full control of the situation. No issues at all. Actually, it kind of seems not that bad of a place to live, all things considered. But then the second he like gets that sniff of power when they see that first war boy with a fucking arrow sticking out of his head, he's like, oh, the Citadel, the Valhalla, that sounds interesting. And then just immediately gets himself involved, tries to take it over. And it works for a while, works for several years where he takes over Gastown. But then, like you said, once we go back there, we just see the rioting in the streets. We see him trying to control the situation. You realize, oh, yeah, he doesn't actually have the skills to be a leader on this level. And then just like cut to him at the end whenever he's just like the fucking ragged, like white hair basically at this point. Like he's not dressed as cool as he was before. Just like the way they kind of show him, like in that final scene with Furiosa, it's like you think about where he was in the beginning with like that fucking white veil over his head, and then where he is now. It just really felt like kind of like rise and fall of cult leader to me, which was a cool dynamic.
What did you think of Dementus being the like sustained villain for Furiosa?
I thought he was a great villain. I think, like I said, that's where like kind of the sometimes standard revenge stuff comes in, just in general movies. But here I quite liked it. It made sense why she was so like aggro against him. Like at first it seems like, oh, I guess, he's gonna take care of her to a degree. Is he gonna like take her in as this weird daughter, which he kind of does, which is this weird dynamic. But then we know the whole time that his goal is to find this green place because it's like that's a place where we can actually live a lot more easily. But then like there are some like moments where you're like, oh, like does he kind of care about her? He saves her from the war boy attack in the Citadel originally. He didn't really have to. I mean, maybe he did just because maybe later she'll tell me where the green place is. I don't know. But yeah, their dynamic was great. But then the whole time knowing like that sadistic scene of what he did to her mother, it's like, well, I mean, there's never going to be any reconciliation here. And then he later does something similar to her mentor and could have been lover. So yeah, I thought it was a great sustained villain. And like the entire time when they're not on screen together, she's just plotting not only a way to get home, but you're like once she becomes the Praetorian with Jack, she's like, okay, this gives me an opportunity to learn skills, but this is also an interesting opportunity for me to kind of stay in this area. Like I'm going to Gastown on these trips. Dementus is there. Like she's the whole time, like there's like moments where she sees Dementus in Gastown. She grabs her gun. Like she's willing just to shoot this guy in this entire crowded city where she'll die right after. So yeah, I thought like that villain dynamic was pretty believable and worked.
Yeah, I also liked at the end, it's almost revealed that he kind of forgot about trying to find the green place because he's done so much other stuff. And so he did all this sadistic things to her mother that Furiosa's held on to, but he kind of forgot about it because he is crazy and he's just been roving the wasteland, kind of laying terror to everybody he encounters. So this was just like another person in a long line of other people he's done terrible things to. I also liked how I do think he does kind of think of Furiosa as his stand-in daughter because he is someone who can remember a time before the wasteland and lost his family. And that is where I think you see the theme of hopelessness in this movie, because at this point in the wasteland, you're only living to really not have anything unless you're from the green place. So everyone has lost something. Everything in this wasteland has turned somebody to a level of crazy. And I really love their conversation at the end when Dementus is pointing out, like, you and I are essentially the same. Like we're filling our rage. We're two evil bastards in the wasteland, as he says. And I really enjoyed like just his levels of dialogue and like the way Dementus showcases the level of hopelessness that everyone in the wasteland is living through.
I hate to do it, but I kind of want to equate it to one of our beloved shows, The Walking Dead. Like he kind of reminds me of Negan in a way. Like Negan's kind of the same way. Negan has like these underlying insecurities, and he has a past, and he had a family, and he was a good guy, but then he turns into this sadistic villain. Yeah, he's just kind of like, fuck it, like this is the world I'm in now. I'm gonna do whatever I want, and we'll just see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Those are two characters that experienced loss during a post-apocalypse, and then instead of dealing with it, they just chose to fully buy in to the sadisticness of the world that they're in. Because it is also kind of comical to a degree at the end whenever he's trying to fight for his life, I guess, and he's just like, well, I had 2 babies and they were taken from me. And you're just like, oh, so then you became this? Like, I think we're a little too far gone here, bud. But it is interesting to see a character fully let the hopelessness come in and just be like, I guess I'll just go along with the violence of this world. I do think there are moments of like deeper thought for him. I love that moment whenever he is torturing Furiosa and Jack, and he climbs up onto the front hood of his big like rig where nobody can, I guess, ostensibly see him. And they just do like a couple of close-ups on his face and his eyes, and he just looks like he just like made this grand speech, and he's like trying to be funny, and he's also like trying to be scary and hurt them. But then whenever he gets up there and the camera's on him, he just looks like hollow. He looks like yeah, it's a weird, to the point where whenever like somebody runs around to be like, "Hey, Furiosa's gone," he's like, "What?" And then he has to like quickly somehow jump back into scary mode. But yeah, that they did showcase like kind of like that hollow nature, and he's just. He might not even really want to do some of this stuff, but he's just like, I have nothing else to do, so I'll do that.
He even says, "You made me become scary Dementis. I don't like being scary Dementis." I think he just wants to be the kind of like goofy leader whose followers love him, but he keeps putting himself in these situations where he has to turn more and more evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This will kind of take us into action too, but the opening intro with Furiosa's mom, like hunting down Dementis' bandits, that was just a great sequence to get you back into this world, because it's a sustained chase across the wasteland, which you're familiar from Fury Road, but then a very different kind of like stealthy sniping like action scene, and just her catching up and like being this expert sniper and slowly picking these guys off one by one and accomplishing her goal too of like no one who has seen the green place can live to tell about it. Like she does achieve that goal, and then unfortunately meets her end with Dementis.
Yeah, I love that opening scene.
Yeah, it's almost like so much crazy shit happens throughout the rest of the movie that you forget about that opening. But yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, like this like days-long epic trek where just occasionally, like maybe every other day, she gets into a spot where she can like snipe one of them from a mile away or something. But yeah, like the first moment of the movie where I got like kind of nervous was whenever she like gets up to that ridge and she can see how close the one with Furiosa is to getting to that town. And then I'm like, what the fuck is she gonna do? And then she somehow even then succeeds at getting her out of there. Yeah, badass opening. Really cool.
Yeah, and then there was that one crash. Remember, she shoots that one guy, I think, and he crashes, and his body goes like halfway into that sand dune. The way that looked.
Oh, yeah, that was wild. That was
so
crazy
crazy.
to look at. I was like, that was a hard impact, I guess. Yeah, speaking of don't mess with people from the green place, Austin, I think maybe perhaps one of the final shots of the movie is a very good reason as to why, because they're all given one of these seeds to plant a tree somewhere, and Furiosa's like, I don't like Dementis very much. I think I'm going to trap him at the top of the Citadel, plant a seed under him, and let a tree grow over him that traps him, but keeps him alive because of all the nutrients that comes from it. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, how did you guys take that? Do you think she's like going up there and feeding him throughout this time too to keep him alive?
I don't know. I mean, he has the water coming off of it, so I guess he doesn't need water. And yeah, maybe she feeds him occasionally, but that was crazy. I also like just like that ending where they really lean into kind of the whole campfire and storytelling nature of the Mad Max movies, where George Miller's always said, you know, there's continuity errors in all of the Mad Max movies, but he's like, that's on purpose. I want Max to feel like a legend. I want these movies to feel like stories that centuries later in the apocalypse, like kids are telling around the campfire of the legendary Mad Max. And he kind of did that in the same thing with Furiosa at the end, whenever the history man, the narrator, is like, you know, some people said that she just quietly shot him in the head after standing there for hours. Some said it was more sadistic, where, you know, she like gave him the same death as Jack, just dragging him across the wasteland. But someone, you know, Furiosa herself whispered to me this idea that, you know, like she fucking planted a tree in him. So I choose to believe the last one is true.
I think when Dementis asked her, do you have it in you to make it epic? The answer is yes, because I did not expect that kind of death and torture.
Also, just a cool line. Do you have it in you to make it epic?
That's pretty cool.
Speaking of epic, we do have a 15-minute sustained war rig chase in this movie that I think almost rivals anything we saw in Fury Road. That scene blew me away. And it's also different enough, too. Like, you see people skiing behind the backs of V8 engines and people paragliding and just, like, insane stuff. I also like, too, this is, like, a culmination. I was reading George Miller wanted this scene to be a culmination of every skill Furiosa's learned so far in this world. So seeing her fixing stuff, popping up, being an expert shot, like, just great reveal to having Anya Taylor-Joy all of a sudden be like, I'm here, I'm on screen.
Yeah, I mean, that was an insane scene. And that's where, like, the practicality kind of from Fury Road really carried over here. I mean, that was just a thrill to watch. So much so that, like, it's weird. I can't even really pick out, like, singular badass moments. I'd have to watch that scene a few more times, because right now it just feels like this I was just so engrossed with it that I can just remember like kind of the bare minimum parts of it. Like you said, like whenever you see characters like kind of like almost like skiing behind them, like what the fuck? I mean, what was the benefit of that? But then like watching like chutes pull and now they're like paragliding up and like shooting the explosives to the top. You're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. But then also watching like the War Boys and Furiosa being able to take down the paragliders and what fucking damage that causes the bikers that are pulling them. Like, ugh, just so cool. So good. No notes.
One mind-blowing thing after another. Yeah, when they pulled the chutes, I was like, oh my God, like how did they think of all this stuff?
I can't think of a scene where you're revealing your like actress or star like more iconic than her mask blowing off. You see Anya Taylor-Joy's iconic hair just like blowing in the wind, and it's like, boom, there she is. She's here to like carry the rest of this movie.
Yeah, she's not pretending to be a boy anymore. Yeah, that was cool. In addition to the action, there was also, like, kind of to your point, some great dramatic moments there. Admittedly, it took me like a couple seconds to kind of put it together in my head, but I love that moment, kind of showing the consequence. I don't remember how it happens, but one of the War Boys or Jack or somebody like shoots one of the opposition, and their bike, and the person themselves is like pulled under the tires and like is get fully pulled under the rig, so much so that it hits where Furiosa is in her bike. Whenever it hits her, you see like all these supplies fall out. I was like, what was the significance of that? And then I remembered like the scene before they left that night before, wherever she's kind of like packing stuff away under the rig. And at first I thought she was like just, you know, fixing something. And then the guy walks over and is like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm just taking a piss. And you're like, oh, that was weird. And then you realize, oh, this was going to be her way to escape, basically. She packed this bike and she had it under, and like, I guess once they got where they were going or slowed down, she was just going to detach and ride off to the green place. But yeah, so great moments within action, like these moments happen, you're like, ah, no, like that sucks. Like you were so close, but couldn't quite pull it off.
So many moments too throughout the film where she wants to make her escape, but realities of the world keep her from doing that. Like you talk about that one. And then of course with Jack, like she finds a lover and could have escaped there too, but goes back and tries to save him. And then that results in her losing her arm and having to go back to the Citadel. So many things about this world just keep her tied to Immortan Joe.
God, that scene when she loses her arm, that makes you hurt.
That hurt. Yeah, that was gross. But yeah, and also like, I think this movie just does a lot of like, in what would be tropey in most stories, this movie does better. Because how many times have we seen that story where you have a character, they have a very clear goal and you're rooting for them to, you know, achieve that goal. But then they have another character walk in and they're like, hey, I see what you're trying to do, but you're not ready yet. Let me help you get ready. And it's like that's like the classic tropey mentor introduction in stories like this. But for some reason, this one didn't bother me in the slightest. I actually thought it was cool. I kind of thought he was right. He was like, hey, I don't know what you're trying to do. I can help you try and do it, but let me tell you, we're in the Wasteland. Like, I'm good at what I do. This place is fucking crazy. I just saw what you did on the war rig. Like, you got skills, but I can teach you literally anything you will need to know to achieve your goal. And even Furiosa's like, I guess you're right. And then it makes you, the audience, go, I think he's right. And then like watching them together going forward, whenever they're like fully in sync, she's not like pretending to be a boy or just be like a standard mechanic, was really badass.
Yeah, I can teach you road warfare, I think is what he said, which is like, yeah, you can.
So cool.
I also think, despite this movie being in that Fury Road banner and does have those like really sustained, awesome action sequences like we've talked about, this does feel like a quieter movie than Fury Road did.
Yeah.
I think the great example of that is the conclusion, where they're kind of leading to this big confrontation, all-out battle between Dementis and the Warlords. And then they pan through that with flashbacks and choose to instead have the climax of their movie be just this conversation between Furiosa and Dementis in the desert. So what did you feel about that kind of subversion of expectations in this movie, and then also just how the movie wraps itself up?
I think it might be controversial for some people, but it definitely fits the tone of this movie. And as we've said ad nauseum today, the tone of this movie is very different from Mad Max. This one is about, you know, Furiosa specifically, it's about revenge. So, like, yeah, I got pretty fucking hyped whenever they were like, and then the 40-day war commenced between, like, the three towns, and you're like, holy shit, are we going to see that? And then, like you said, it becomes more of just a quick little montage, which we know the 40-day war is important because in Fury Road, Immortan Joe has control of all three towns. Like, he has his lieutenants in this movie, like those are the people from Fury Road that are running those places. So he won the war, but like they basically introduced that concept, and then a minute later they're like, well, we did it. But yeah, again, it makes sense for this movie because that's not really what this is about. It's about, you know, Furiosa and her journey and how she kind of gets to where she is in Fury Road. And I mean, also, I mean, before we get to kind of that more quiet confrontation at the end, like kind of how that felt, I thought it was like kind of an underrated sequence whenever Dementis, it really, again, this is what kind of solidified it for me, being like about the rise and fall of a cult leader. This is like the perfect example of the fall. Like you used to have like thousands upon thousands of people following you. And then it ultimately ends with him having like his 4 closest buds, basically. Like they're all riding their motorcycles trying to escape. And then they realize, you know,
he's still riding his chariot.
Yep. I guess they realize that Furiosa or just somebody's after them. And then they're like, oh, what do we do, boss? And he's basically just like, give me your fucking clothes. He's like, I'm going to pretend to be you. And then just watching them all drive off in Furiosa, somehow like taking out all of them despite them going different directions was badass. And then ending with the Dementor stuff at the end. It's like, yeah, would it have been cool to get like more of the war itself? Yeah, but I think for this story, kind of having that like awesome like Furiosa like 1v5 motorcycle scene and then the eventual like one-on-one with Dementis was pretty badass in its own right.
I also loved Chris Hemsworth's delivery in that scene when he's like, we did some mighty things together, goodbye, and just leaves them all. Yeah, I think you're right, Matt. The idea of seeing the 40-Day War would have been cool, but the focus of this movie is Furiosa, and the movie never loses sight of that. And I kind of like we got that extended conversation that we touched on too between Dementis and Furiosa, because it was good closure to this chapter in this story. And seeing Furiosa track down all 3, like you said, and then kind of take her revenge in the most gruesome way I could have thought on Dementis was very satisfying.
Yeah, and in reality, if they were going to show any more of the 40-Day War, they would have had to dramatically change the script of this movie. Like, that would have needed a lot more time, but that probably would have been the entire 3rd act, so like they would have had to take out so much good stuff. So it makes sense we didn't get it. Is it a little bit weird that it is introduced and then it's over in a minute? Sure, but I still think the pacing works for the most part.
And you see the aftermath when she's walking through. Like, you can tell it was brutal.
Yeah.
And I like that you kind of get to see her walk through the battlefield, too.
And if they do another movie, maybe they'll open up with showing 10 or 15 minutes of the 40-Day War.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a good point. I mean, I do wonder if there's a world where we get any more of Furiosa. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could, years down the line, you could do an older version of the story with Charlize Theron back. If this does kind of pick up speed at the box office and does like super well on Max, then maybe you do get like an Anya Taylor-Joy like Furiosa 2 that takes place in between the movies or something like that, where they can include something like the 40-Day War. Or maybe they just jump right back to Mad Max, the Wasteland, because I know George Miller wants to do that too. Like, I don't know what's next, but I'm excited about the future. Like, I am a little bit nervous about the box office only because like, my guess is the first 3 Mad Max movies were box office, like, colossi, basically. Then Fury Road comes out, people are stoked for it. It costs so much money to make that even, like, almost $400 million at the box office wasn't that much of a profit. But they were like, well, you know what? It did okay on streaming. We trust you, George. We'll give you another shot. You go for it. You got to go picture, buddy. And then he makes this. And if it has the same fate, just like a little bit of a profit, I don't know if they take the risk again, which is kind of unfortunate because I really want them to. So I think my hope right now is like we get like a steady, increase at the box office, or if we get a decrease, it's just not that big of a fall off. We make a little bit of a profit, and then whenever this thing hits max, like people just flock to it, and then like the producers are like, okay, well, they're jumping the bit to stream it, so that's enough to get you another movie. That's my hope right now. I think that's kind of our only hope of getting another one at this point.
Yeah, I desperately want another one. I want to see Tom Hardy back for sure. I want to see the Wasteland explored like in a post Fury Road world and see what that looks like. So I'm really hoping word of mouth builds and hopes this movie. I also think if you just kind of zoom out and look at George Miller's career and his age, like he started his career with this Mad Max trilogy. So it would be very cyclical of him to end his career with another successful Mad Max trilogy.
Well, with that, guys, I think that kind of concludes our Furiosa talk here. I think that was a good one. But before we close out, let's do some Arnies Podcast Awards, the part of our show where we take something from whatever project we just watched and we give it an award. It can be something positive, negative, or something in between, guys. Today, what do we think?
I'll give the Interconnected Award. Whenever Furiosa is going out on her final kind of chasing down Dementis and she gets handed this car by a random character in the Citadel. That is Chumbucket from the Mad Max game. So it's fun to see these stories kind of get interconnected. And I guess that Mad Max game is now canon if George Miller's putting Chumbucket in the movie.
I love that game. I mean, I know George Miller consulted on it. So yeah, I think it's canon. Yeah, that's cool. I didn't pick up on that.
He consulted on it, didn't let them see anything from Fury Road, so I didn't know what they were making. But he said he wants another one, so I'd also be. I mean, I have downloaded that game to play it again this weekend because I love it so much. So I'm glad they put Chumbucket in there.
You know, I've given a lot of awards in this podcast for things that just gross me out. So I feel like I got to do another one. I would just call it the Gooey Food Award, and that goes to pretty much. It was like 3 different characters that ate on this thing. Do you guys remember? There was one point in this movie. There was like some goo type like meat thing that like I think Furiosa and maybe it was it might have been Dementus as well. They grabbed into it and like were just eating this nasty like gelatin looking.
Did you like kind of the meat chop with all the maggots on the flesh?
Ugh. I couldn't look at that.
Okay, we'll give the maggot award to Furiosa's arm.
That lady saved her.
No, but at what cost?
Did you like the 1 millisecond pan of Max during that scene?
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. It was honestly a pretty wonky cameo. Just like a quick little pan over and it's like, there's Mad Max. Can't see his face though, because Tom Hardy, we can't pay him $1 million for 1 second of a wide shot. Oh, that was funny. Yeah, I think my award, this is, I guess, a very specific one, but frankly, I couldn't shake it, so I would feel weird, like, giving an award to anything else. But, so we have the brothers, of the sons of Immortan Joe. We have Rictus and Scrotus. I remembered Rictus very clearly from Fury Road. Scrotus, he looked like, I was convinced that Mikey Day from SNL was playing him, because he looked exactly like Butthead from the recent Ryan Gosling SNL sketches they did. Like, he looked exactly. I was like, is this like I mean, they filmed this a while ago, so that can't be Mikey Day. And it wasn't. It was Josh Hellman. I was like, dude, I couldn't stop. Like, I was just laughing every time he came on screen. He was already the doofy younger brother, but now, like, just with that design, I was like, is this intentional? So I thought that was hilarious. So he gets the Butthead Award.
What genitalia themed name do you think the third son would have been named if he'd lived?
Analictus?
Sphincter.
Oh, Sphinctus! Oh, that's better. Sphinctus is good. If I'm actually remembering right, I think Scrotus is the main villain in the Mad Max game. Yeah, no, it is him. Scaborius Scrotus, son of Immortan Joe. So I guess his first name is Scaborius? So I guess that's why he's not in Fury Road, because Max has to kill him in that game. Well, with that, I think it's time to close out, though thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit that follow button so you never miss our upcoming content. Also, please share us with your friends if you enjoyed this episode. We really would appreciate it so we continue to grow our show. Please leave us reviews as well. Even if you don't want to write anything, leaving us a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever your podcasts sort of help us out. At the Arnies is our social, and the Arnies.media is the website. We'll be back next Tuesday with another episode.
And lastly, we want to hear from you, so please send us a message on Instagram at the Arnies or email us thearniesmedia@gmail.com. What did you think of Furiosa? Are you hoping for more Mad Max films? Would you survive more than 2 minutes in the Wasteland? Anything you say, we'll read on the show and react to it live in our latest episode.
All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed Furiosa as much as we did, and you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you next week. Looking forward to it. Have a good week.
See ya.
Do you have it in you to make it epic?